You've been holding it together for a long time now. At work, at home, in the conversations where you swallowed what you actually wanted to say, in the mornings where you got up anyway, not because it was easy, but because there was no one else to do it. And somewhere in the middle of all that, quietly, without much ceremony, you started wondering, am I actually getting stronger through this, or am I just still standing? That's the question we're sitting with today. If you've been wondering whether you're just surviving or whether something in you has actually been building, stay with us. 5 signs the Stoics would say you're further along than you think. And the 5th sign, the one we'll get to last, is the one most men get completely wrong because it doesn't look like strength at all. Welcome back to Stoic and Ancient Philosophy. I'm Patrick, and with me, as always, is Gary.
Good to be here. And I'll say this up front. This episode is not a pep talk.
No, it's not.
The Stoics weren't in the business of telling men they were doing great. They were in the business of showing men what was already true, whether they'd noticed it or not. That's a different thing entirely.
It is. And I think that distinction is going to matter a lot today, because the men listening to this, they're not looking for a rally. They're looking for something more like a reckoning.
Then let's give them sign 1.
Sign 1. You are still here. I want to start there because I think most men hear that and immediately discount it. Still here. That's not an achievement, that's just not quitting.
And that's exactly the problem with how we've been taught to measure strength. We've been taught to look for the dramatic moment, the comeback, the visible recovery, the point where someone says, "There, that's where he turned it around." The Stoics didn't measure it that way.
How did they measure it?
Consistency under friction. Marcus Aurelius, Book 5, opening passage, writes to himself about the act of rising in the morning. Not a speech, not a philosophy lecture. A man arguing himself out of bed. He asks, "Why do I lie here when the work of a rational being demands I rise?" And his answer is not inspiration. It's obligation to his own nature. A rational creature acts in accordance with reason, even when the body resists. The Stoics had a term for the governing part of the mind that makes that call: the hegemonikon, the commanding faculty, the part of you that overrides the body's preference for stillness and says, "We rise."
But is that really enough? Getting up in the morning, showing up to a job that's grinding you down, coming home to a house where everyone needs something? Is that actually what the Stoics would point to and call strength?
They would point to it and call it evidence. Not heroism, evidence. The man who performs courage once, in a single visible moment, and then retreats, that man has done something. But the man who shows up on the hard Tuesday, and the Tuesday after that, and the one after that, without recognition, without a moment where someone holds up a trophy and says, "Well done," that man is doing more philosophical work, because he's doing it without the reward that makes it easy.
That's a reframe I wasn't expecting.
Most men aren't, because we've been trained to look for the dramatic proof, and the Stoics kept pointing at the quiet one.
There's an image that keeps coming to me as you're talking. The long-distance runner, deep into a race, who has been running so long that the effort has become invisible to him. He thinks he's barely moving. He's lost all sense of his own pace, and then someone shows him the stopwatch.
The stopwatch disagrees.
Exactly. The evidence was there the whole time. He just stopped being able to see it.
Which is precisely what this episode is. 5 times we hold up the stopwatch.
Sign 2 is the one that surprised me most when we were building this, because it's been hiding in plain sight, and most men have been told it's a character flaw. Sign 2, you carry without complaint. And I want to be precise about why I said this one surprises me. Because when we were building this episode, this was the sign I almost cut. Because from the outside, it doesn't look like anything. It looks like a man who just absorbs things, swallows things, keeps moving. And we've been told, haven't we, that that's a character flaw. That the man who doesn't express, doesn't process, that silence is suppression.
That's a reasonable concern. And it's worth separating two things that look identical from the outside, but are completely different operations on the inside. There is a silence that comes from avoidance, from not wanting to feel something, from pushing it down because looking at it is too costly. That silence has a weight to it, and it accumulates. And then there is a different silence. Epictetus, chapter 8 of the Enchiridion, writes, "Seek not that the things which happen should happen as you wish, but wish the things which happen to be as they are, and you will have a tranquil flow of life." That's not suppression. That's the removal of the premise that complaint rests on. The man who has stopped complaining hasn't buried the feeling. He has stopped insisting that reality should have arranged itself differently. Those are not the same thing.
But isn't that just acceptance? Isn't that, I hear this and part of me wants to say, isn't that just giving up? Isn't that resignation dressed in philosophical language?
Epictetus would say there's a difference between resignation and alignment. Resignation says, I wanted something else, and I lost. It carries the grief of the gap, the distance between what was and what you demanded. Alignment says, I've stopped fighting the terms of reality. I've withdrawn the demand. One is defeat, the other. The Stoics would call it the beginning of a tranquil life. Their words, not mine. And the man who has reached that, who has genuinely reached that, not as performance but as practice, what does that look like from the inside? It looks like economy. He stops spending energy on what he cannot change, not because he doesn't feel it, because he has recognized that the expenditure costs more than the outcome is worth. That's not numbness, that's precision.
There's a sailor in this somewhere.
There is.
The man who stops fighting the wind and reads it instead. He's going to the same destination. He arrives at the same point on the map, but he arrives with something the man who fought the wind the whole way doesn't have.
He arrives knowing something, and he arrives less exhausted.
Sign 3 is where this conversation shifts. Because signs 1 and 2, you can see them if you know what to look for. Sign 3 is different. Gary is going to bring something from Seneca into this room, and I want you to hear it because it reframes everything we've said so far. Sign 3. You have absorbed the blow. And I want to stay with that phrase for a moment because when Gary first brought this into our prep conversation, I wrote it down, just those 5 words, because there's something in it that the other signs don't have. Signs 1 and 2, you can observe them. You can watch a man and see them. Sign 3 is different. Sign 3 lives entirely on the inside.
Seneca opens the Epistulae Morales, the very first letter, section 3, with a line that I think is the sharpest thing he ever wrote. He says, Omnia, Lucili, aliena sunt, tempus tantum nostrum est. Nothing, Lucilius, is ours except time. He is not writing about calendars. He is not writing about productivity. He is writing about what it costs a man to absorb a blow without accounting for it. Every blow absorbed and not examined, not named, not looked at directly, takes something. And what it takes is the one thing Seneca says belongs to you, not your reputation, not your position, not your relationships, your time, the interior time, the time a man has with himself.
Say more about that distinction, interior time.
Think of a boxer, not a man losing a fight, a man who has been in the ring long enough that he no longer flinches. The punch lands. He doesn't go down. He doesn't react. He absorbs it and keeps moving. And from the outside, from the crowd, that looks like composure, that looks like mastery. But the body remembers. Every absorbed blow is still there, registered in the tissue, in the posture, in the way he holds his shoulders at the end of a round. He's still standing, but the cost of standing is accumulating in a place he cannot see.
That's not strength, that's debt.
That's exactly what it is, and the Stoics were precise about this. They were not asking men to absorb blows without examination. That is not what Marcus Aurelius meant in the Meditations when he wrote about endurance. The Stoic practice is not suppression dressed in philosophical language. It is examination. It is the discipline of looking directly at what has landed, and then deciding, deliberately, what it means and what it costs. The man who absorbs without examining, he is not practicing Stoicism. He is practicing avoidance with better vocabulary.
That line is going to land hard for a specific kind of man, the man who has read Marcus Aurelius, who has the quotes, who knows the framework, and has used it as a reason not to feel anything, as a permission structure for numbness.
And Seneca's line from that first letter cuts through it directly. Nothing is ours except time. The man who absorbs blow after blow without accounting for the cost, he is spending the one thing Seneca says belongs to him. Spending it on the maintenance of an image, on the performance of composure. And at some point, not dramatically, not in a single moment, the account runs low. That is what sign 3 looks like from the inside. Not collapse, not crisis, just a quiet depletion. A man who is still standing, still functioning, still showing up, but who has less and less of himself available for the things that actually matter to him.
And the cost of that is time. Sign 4 is the one Gary told me when we were building this episode that most men never see coming. Not because it's hidden, because it looks like something else entirely. We'll be there in a moment. You have stopped expecting. And I said before we started this segment that Gary told me this is the one most men never see coming. Not because it's hidden, because it looks like something else. It looks like peace. It looks like maturity. It looks like a man who has finally gotten comfortable with his life. And it might be all of those things, or it might be something else entirely.
Seneca, Epistulae Morales, Letter 5, Section 7. He's quoting a philosopher named Epictetus, and the line is short enough that I want to give it to you exactly as it stands. Cease to hope, and you will cease to fear. Now, the first time you hear that, it sounds like an instruction toward peace. Cease to hope. Stop wanting things to be different, and the fear goes with it. That sounds like relief. But Seneca doesn't stop there. He says, hope and fear are fastened together like a prisoner and the soldier who guards him. They move as one, the same chain. You cannot release one without releasing the other. And the reason both exist, the reason the chain exists at all, is that the mind has sent itself into the future. It is living somewhere that has not happened yet.
So when a man stops expecting, stops hoping for the promotion, stops hoping the relationship turns around, stops hoping things get easier, he's not at peace. He's cut the chain by cutting himself.
That's the distinction. And it's the one that makes sign 4 the hardest to read from the outside. Because the man who has genuinely arrived at Stoic equanimity and the man who has simply gone numb look identical at a dinner table. They both sit quietly. They both stop complaining. They both carry without visible strain. But one of them has done the work. He has examined what he can control and what he cannot. He has withdrawn his demand on the future, not because he has stopped caring, but because he has located his energy precisely where it can actually move something. That is not the absence of expectation. That is the redirection of it.
That's the trap, because the man who has gone numb has also stopped expecting, but he stopped for a different reason. He stopped because the cost of hoping got too high, because he hoped and it didn't come, and then he hoped again and it didn't come again, and at some point the mind just closes the account.
Seneca calls it living in suspension. The mind that is fretted by looking forward, his exact phrase, is not a mind at rest. It is a mind exhausted by its own forward lean, and when that exhaustion becomes total, the lean stops, but the exhaustion doesn't. The man looks still. He is not still. He is depleted. The Stoic correction, and this is precise, is not to stop expecting. It is to return to the present. Seneca writes in that same letter, "The present alone can make no man wretched, not the past, not the future. The present is the only ground a man can actually stand on."
So the question isn't whether a man has stopped expecting. The question is why he stopped and what he did with the energy that was freed.
Exactly. Stillness that comes from clarity is not emptiness. Stillness that comes from defeat, that is, and from the outside, they wear the same face.
Not emptiness. That phrase is going to stay with me. Sign 5 is where this episode turns from diagnosis to direction. Gary is going to bring something into the room that changes what a man does with Monday morning, not in theory, in practice. We'll be there in a moment. Sign 5. You have become selective with your energy. And I want to be careful here, because selective is a word that can be used to justify almost anything. A man who has withdrawn from his family can call it selective. A man who has stopped showing up can call it selective. So I want Gary to draw the line precisely, because this sign, more than any of the others, depends entirely on what's driving it.
The line is this: selectivity that comes from clarity is a sign of strength. Selectivity that comes from depletion is a sign of the same exhaustion we've been talking about since sign 1. They look the same from the outside. The interior is completely different. Seneca, letter 2 of the Epistulae Morales, gives a practical instruction that I think is the most useful thing in this entire episode. He says, "Each day, from everything you have encountered, every conversation, every demand, every decision, select one thing, one, and digest it. Not process everything, not optimize everything, not extract lessons from everything. One thing, digested. His word, not mine."
And that's the practice. That's what Monday morning looks like.
That's the practice. Because the man who has been carrying signs 1 through 4, who shows up, who carries without complaint, who has absorbed the blows, who has stopped expecting, that man is not short on experience. He is short on digestion. He has been moving so fast, carrying so much, that nothing has had time to become wisdom. It has just accumulated as weight.
So selectivity isn't about doing less. It's about letting something actually land.
Epictetus opens the Enchiridion, the very first line, with the most fundamental division in Stoic philosophy. Some things are in our control, and others are not. That's not a passive observation. That is a daily sorting exercise. Every morning, a man who practices this is making a decision about where his energy goes, not based on what's loudest, not based on what's most urgent, but based on what is actually within his reach to change. That is selectivity with a spine. That is not withdrawal. That is precision.
And the man who has arrived at sign 5 genuinely arrived, not collapsed into it. What does he look like to the people around him?
He looks quieter. He looks less reactive. He stops chasing conversations that go nowhere. He stops spending Sunday night rehearsing arguments that will never be had. He is present, not because he has given up on the future, but because he has stopped leaking himself into it. And there is a line from Epictetus. Seneca quotes him in Letter 6 that I think is the most compact description of what sign 5 actually feels like from the inside. Epictetus says, "I have begun to be a friend to myself." That is not a small thing. That is not a self-help slogan. That is a man describing the moment he stopped being at war with his own interior. The moment the energy that was spent on maintenance, on performance, on carrying, on absorbing, began to return to him.
Not a program, not a system, just one thing, digested one day at a time.
Not a program.
We've covered 5 signs, and if you've been listening, really listening, you've probably recognized at least one of them, maybe more than one. What we want to do now is give you 3 things you can actually use. Not concepts, not frameworks, 3 practices, concrete, specific for the week ahead. 3 things. That's all we're asking. Not a program, not a system, not a 30-day challenge. 3 practices, 1 for the morning, 1 for the day, 1 for the end of it. Gary.
Exercise 1. The morning sort. Before you open your phone, before the first message, the first notification, the first demand lands, take 2 minutes and sort 2 columns. What is in your control today? What is not? Epictetus called this the fundamental division. He wasn't describing a philosophy. He was describing a daily practice. You do not need a notebook. You do not need an app. You need 1 sentence in each column. 1 sentence. That's the constraint. That's the practice.
And the point isn't to solve the second column. The point is to stop spending the day on it.
Exactly. The sort is not a plan. It is a boundary. Everything in the second column, you set it down. Not forever, just for today. You pick it up tomorrow and sort again. Exercise 2. The one thing. Seneca's instruction from Letter 2. Select 1 thing from the day and digest it. Not a list of lessons, not a journal entry. 1 thing. It can be a conversation that landed differently than you expected. A moment where you reacted and then wished you hadn't. A decision you made without thinking. 1 thing. You hold it. You look at it directly. You ask, what did this cost me? And was the expenditure mine to make?
That last question is doing a lot of work.
It is. Because most of what drains a man in a given day is not the weight of what he carried. It is the weight of what he carried that was never his to carry. The sort in the morning tells him what belongs to him. The digest in the evening tells him whether he honored that boundary. Exercise 3. the one sentence before sleep. Not a gratitude list, not a reflection prompt. One sentence, spoken or written, it doesn't matter, that answers this question. Where was I present today? Not where was I productive, not where was I useful, where was I actually present? Because the man who has been carrying signs 1 through 5, he has been present everywhere except inside himself. This sentence is not about performance. It is about locating the one moment in the day where the interior and the exterior were aligned. One moment. That's enough.
And over time, not dramatically, not in a week, that question starts to change what a man pays attention to during the day, because he knows he's going to have to answer it at the end of it.
Hecato's line from letter 6 comes back here. I have begun to be a friend to myself. That is not the destination. That is the description of a man who has started doing something like these 3 things, consistently, without drama, without expecting transformation. Just a morning sort, a single digested thing, one sentence before sleep. That is what it looks like to begin.
5 signs, 3 practices, 1 week. If this episode found you at the right moment, and I think for some of you it did, share it with one person. Not because we need the numbers, because the man who needs to hear this probably won't find it on his own. He's too busy carrying. We'll be back next Friday. Until then, sort, digest, locate. Take care of yourself.